Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Wagner, VP of Brand at SOG, and want to thank you for joining us for the first in our series of webinars. Observations with is something we've been talking about for some time. In the course of developing products, we work with a broad range of interesting, knowledgeable, and passionate people to better understand the challenges they encounter and how we can help them to do their job better. During the one-on-ones and roundtable working sessions with users, a concept that comes up time and again is mindset and preparedness. Often that user's knowledge is central to their effective use of any gear or effectiveness to respond to a situation. In short, you're only as good as your training. It's this idea that stood out to us. We can make great gear, but if people aren't prepared to use it, don't know how to use it, have selected the wrong tool for the job, or don't have the mindset to be effective, it won't matter what they're carrying. Ultimately, training and knowledge is greater than the gear anyone can carry. So that's where the idea of sharing how to build up a preparedness mindset and related content came about, to offer knowledge-based tools that complement and enhance the physical tools that we all use. We hope that you'll all find value in this series of webinars, but please let us know what you think or what other topics you'd like to see in future webinars. As you know, today, we've got Jason Harper presenting to us on the preparedness mindset. And in the upcoming weeks, we'll have Emily Valentine on embracing situational awareness and Sarah Carlson on preparing and defining your EDC essentials. We'll open up registration to future sessions during the webinar and send out a link in the chat shortly. In a moment, Matt Crawford will do a quick intro with Jason. And since we're doing this live, we'll be doing a questions and answers session at the end. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom. You can send in any questions at any time during the presentations. Hopefully they're relevant questions. We'll collect them up and hopefully have the time to go through all of them at the end. We've also got a poll running. What do you consider to be the most essential piece of gear needed in your go bag? We'll take a look at the results before the Q&A. And with that, I'll turn things over to Matt Crawford and Jason Harper to take a deeper dive into tonight's subject.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let's get to it. As you mentioned, my name is Matt Crawford. I'm here with SOG. As you also mentioned, we're joined tonight by Jason Harper. And Jason, we're going to briefly set up what you're going to share with us tonight real quick, and then we'll jump right to it. Before we do that, though, tell us a little bit about the website you're running. It's called Preparation Concierge, and I know it's devoted to emergency planning and disaster preparation. And I know you use contributions from those in the outdoor and adventure media world. So I get that some of what you're going to discuss tonight are byproducts of that work you've done on the site. But tell me a little bit more.
Basically, I'm a journalist, and I've been doing it for over 20 years. And I grew up in northern New Mexico on a ranch where we were self-sufficient. After school, I moved to New York City, where being self-sufficient was really tough. The last 10 years, I've had a house in the Poconos, in the mountains of Pennsylvania, where I'm broadcasting tonight. Here, I've got running water. I've been cutting wood all day. You know, we've got a well. It's pretty easy. In the city, though, if you are an urbanite, a suburbanite, and somewhere on the coast, what do you do to get prepared for an emergency? It's tough. And when I started trying to figure it out, I couldn't find any good repositories of information. I started talking to experts, trying to talk to, how do we do this? And that's where Preparation Concierge came about. And what I realized was it wasn't just the urbanites and suburbanites and the coastal people. There were lessons that maybe everybody could take from.
That makes sense. And so I'm going to now turn the Zoom keys over to you and get about 30 minutes of some insight on being prepared and the preparedness mindset.
Cool. I do appreciate it. Let's see here. All right. Peril. What is the greatest peril that you've ever been in? You know, that time you look back, you think, man, that was close. If it had gone just a little bit differently, or maybe it did go differently and you or someone you cared about got hurt. 20 plus years as a journalist or writer has put me next to a bunch of really extraordinary people in often weird, extraordinary situations. The kinds where situational awareness and general mindfulness can go a long way. There was a time we were flying around the Amazon with a former Army Ranger in a really pretty shabby Cessna, and we spent a week with a remote Brazilian tribe. It was illegal to enter their land without permission, on threat of death by clubbing or spear. We were invited. One point we were on the Xingu River in a canoe, and that canoe overturned. It put us into the same river as the snapping piranhas we'd just been fishing for. Don't thrash around. It's what I learned is piranhas are attracted by thrashing. Good to know. I've also spent decades writing about exotic automobiles. I've tested them. I've raced them. I've hung out with some of the best drivers in the world. That's rally racing in Oregon with a good friend a couple years ago. This winter, I was sliding around a Porsche race car in the Arctic Circle, getting a drive of an Audi R18 race car that had just won Le Mans. Now, in that case, it was worth about $10–20 million and was irreplaceable. I often get in over my head. Lastly, there's been crime reporting in places like Sao Paulo, Brazil. A famous rapper by the name of Nalginho showed me around his favela. It was kind of a crime tour that included the spot on the mountainside where the drug lords dropped the bodies. It was marked by buzzards flying overhead. So yeah, peril, right? What got me through most of that? Frankly, a good amount of blind luck. But whenever I get into a race car or head to someplace remote like the Gobi Desert or Bhutan, my brain clicks over to a state of heightened mental readiness that I call the preparation mindset. It's basically a process where you activate a tiny, we got my gear. Somehow I got the pole coming up on me. Anyway, it's a place where you activate. There's a piece of your mind and get what is essential. Bring those dangers into focus. One of the things we'll talk about tonight is bringing that on the job, that expedition mindset back home with you. Listen, I know you guys, my audience, have all kinds of stories of peril. You are an experienced worldly group that includes first responders, outdoors people, current ex-military, law enforcement, adventurers, travelers, people not afraid to go out into the world and push boundaries. But it's one thing, right, when you go out onto the job and you know that there may be a level of danger. You're scanning the horizon for storms, whatever they might be. You're prepared. It's another when you come back home to your family, your safe place, and peril comes calling. Those are the storms we don't expect, and often the ones we're least ready for. Today, I want to talk about preparing for those storms that knock on your doorstep. They could be hurricanes or floods, wildfires, earthquakes, or something like the pandemic. So, quick rundown of the discussion tonight. Indeed, the preparedness mindset and how to create a like-minded group. My guess is you're already the kind of person who's kind of prepared. You tuned in tonight, right? But do you find yourself trying to coach friends and family to adopt that mindset? You may have it, but I bet a number of your circle doesn't, and you may find that frustrating. You're the emergency freak, right? We will get practical. I will give you 4 concrete steps to get started today. I promise there'll be nothing esoteric, no diagrams of 1950s style like nuclear bunkers, okay? Just good stuff. Now, the last step, gear. I know you are probably a ton of gear aficionados out there. I love gear. So at the least count it as an excuse to go buy some cool stuff, all right? Disasters just don't happen on schedule. I think that especially when it comes to home life, we all like to think that, everything will be all right. We've all heard that motto. If it's not all right in the end, it's not the end. Well and good, but sometimes things don't go all right. And a level of preparedness and mindset go a long way. We need to get some stuff together, both literally and mentally, to better prepare for those new storms. So, brings us to our new normal. Looks like this, right? For a while, ridiculously, it looked like that. In places like New York and Italy, it really did look like this. And around the world, sadly, it looks like that. COVID-19 is looming over everything. It's one constant, slow-moving disaster scenario. But guess what? All the regular disasters, they keep coming too. In the middle of the pandemic, anything that goes wrong feels like piling on. In fact, I'm calling them add-on disasters. On the West Coast, we knew it was coming. The dry conditions, the wind, but the hellscape that has developed is absolutely terrifying, devastating. The lives lost, The sky itself has turned an apocalyptic orange. It isn't going to get better soon. It's not going to stop this year. It's not going to stop next. A friend of mine and I were talking. She lives in LA, and there's not fires by her house, but she was saying, listen, I can't open the windows. And after all the pandemic stuff, that feels like a boot on my neck. You know, and don't forget about all the other California calamities like mudslides and earthquakes and tsunamis. Good times, right? Here on the East Coast, Northeast, the sky's been pretty blue, but we've also had Hurricane Laura and Sally land down south. And, you know, guess what? Late summer and fall brings big storms like Irene and Sandy, huge devastation. We may have not seen that big hurricane yet, and I'm glad for it, but it may be coming. It will absolutely come this season or next, unfortunately. It's a mess, right? It's absolutely a mess. There is an opportunity here, though. You are already in a higher state of awareness just because you're dealing with the pandemic. There will be a flood or a wildfire or a hurricane that will affect you in the future. Use this time to get prepared for whatever does come next. Because, provocative statement, gear is useless, right? A preparedness mindset is more important than having all the gear in the world. You can have your garage, your basement stuffed with great stuff, but if you don't know how to use it, if it's still packed in plastic, you know, the batteries aren't inside, it might as well not be there at all. If the smoke is billowing out of the ground right now and the earth is shaking, it's not the time to be looking for that flashlight. And, you know, is it AA or AAA? Here's the positive, here's the negative. How's that work? Pivoting real quickly to my relationship with SOG. One of the things I do for a living is test equipment. And last year, they invited me to their headquarters in Washington State to talk knives, along with a small group of professionals who also use knives in their daily life. We talked about knives as tools. And when I think about a knife in an emergency situation, I think go bag, you know, certainly with your along with your med kit and yes, the toilet paper. But other guys there included a police officer and a firefighter. The way they used knives in their daily lives was really different. And there were also two soldiers. One of them was a total special forces badass. He taught SEALs combat shooting techniques. It was a dude, right? The way he talked about knives and how knives influence in his daily life was vastly different from my knife needs. But there was a commonality in that room amongst all of us, and it was the idea that a state of mental readiness was essential to all of us in our daily lives. In the morning, I get up, whether I'm in the city or I'm out here in the Poconos, and I put a knife in my pocket. It's a mental nudge, a physical reminder that, you know, I don't really know how my day's gonna take me. I'll probably use it to break down Amazon boxes. But it's also a hedge that if some emergency does present itself, I've given myself a tool to get through unpleasant surprises. Which brings me back to my first question about peril, right? What was my greatest peril? And it wasn't reporting on drug lords in Sao Paulo or, you know, driving cars, but it actually took place on a leafy side street in Chelsea, New York, about 10 years ago. It was a hot August night. My wife and I and our small black cat went to bed, and I woke up around midnight with smoke and heat just roiling around our bedroom. A fire had broken out directly below us, 2 floors below us. The woman who lived in that unit, she was already dead. My wife and I, we tried to get out the fire escape, right? Fine, fire escape, bomb out the fire escape. Well, there were flames shooting out the windows 2 floors below us, and the firefighters intercepted us. They were there and they said, no, you can't go into your neighbor's apartment. So we climbed in 1 floor below where we live and 1 floor above where the fire was, into a living room of our neighbors. It was an older couple. She was in a wheelchair, and we were brought into the kitchen, and there's the firefighters with full oxygen masks and, you know, oxygen, and this couple, and we're in our bedclothes. Our cat is in a smelly gym bag we'd thrown the cat in. And frankly, it felt ridiculous, like a lark. I was like, what a weird turn to my Monday night. And then it got dark. And I thought, you know, oh, the lights went out. But they hadn't. We were breathing this terrible, acrid smoke. And the firefighters were panicking. One was yelling into his mic. He's like, we're trapped on the 5th floor. We're trapped. I always think of the movie Backdraft, you know, where you throw your mate over your shoulder and you're like leaping through the burning embers and bust through a window. It always seemed, I guess, a little realistic to me. The truth is, in a fire like that, you can't see, you can't breathe, and you just crouch into a ball and you suffocate to death. So finally, a firefighter grabbed my wife by the hand and led us down a black hall into the door. We opened up into the inside foyer where there was the stairs downstairs, and there was burning fire in there. I felt my eyelids start to smoke. And I thought, man, this is it. This is where we die. How weird. And then the firefighter burst through a door on the backside of that landing into a neighbor's apartment on the backside of the building. And suddenly, it was clean air. And there was a fire escape we could access on the backside of the building. We got out. When we hit the street, that was what we were looking at. That upper window in the photo, that's the apartment that we were trapped in the kitchen. The woman in the wheelchair actually did die several days later because of effects of fire. Storms never come when you expect them. Turns out there was access to that fire escape. You just could have reached it from the roof. I could have gone up one flight of stairs and just avoided the whole thing. I didn't know it. You weren't supposed to go to the roof, but I should have. But I'd never imagined I'd need a third exit other than the fire escape right outside my window or the stairs we used every day. In fact, we lived almost on the top floor, so we didn't even have renter's insurance. It was like, were we gonna have a flood? Despite all those years of traveling, I thought I was totally mentally prepared. Turns out when I got back home, I wasn't. That brings me to the enemy of the preparedness mindset, and it's something that scientists call normalcy bias. It's this belief that a disaster is not going to affect you. This is the way my life's gone, it's the way she'll continue to be, right? It assails all of us, especially when we get back home. You know, that person in New Jersey who lives on the coast that says, I've lived through 6 hurricanes, it'll be fine. Or the person in California says, I've been to California and I know I've got an evacuation under order, but I'm gonna jump in my pool if something happens. Or me saying, hey, listen, I've got a fire escape right outside my window, I'll be fine no matter what. The pandemic certainly couldn't happen here. So bringing that back to, okay, fine, you're gonna get mentally prepared. So now what? How do you do that, right? Well, I'm gonna give you these 4 concrete steps, really practical stuff that you can absolutely institute later tonight if you so choose. And the first most important thing is get one of these. All right, so I promise no photos of 1950s style bunkers, but I love this. I love this illustration, right? The dudes are ties, of course, important. There is emergency oxygen, that seems helpful. The plumbing seems a little scant. I do appreciate the periscope because of the atmosphere above. I'm not sure what is going on, but it seems pretty bad. Listen, good news. You don't need the bunker, right? Practicality is your friend. You have to make it easy. You got to make it simple because if there's too much going on, you'll never get started. You've got those Zoom conference calls after all, probably some homeschooling. So you need to break it down to these 4 basic steps to get moving on it. The first one is assessing threats, okay? We're often lousy at looking around and saying, what's most dangerous to me and my family? The most likely scenario actually is that house or apartment fire. Beyond that, are you in a flood zone? You know, have you seen 2 big floods lately? Is the sky outside you orange because there's flames nearby? Those might be, you know, threats to worry about. If you've got zombie hordes, then you should go get off this call, get a machete and your shotgun, and best of luck on you. The pandemic, where does it fit in? I am not pretending that I'm any huge expert on the coronavirus or any of this stuff, but I do think you can look at it in sort of a common sense way. The longer it goes on, the more stressed systems become, right? So shipping, food supplies, public utilities, first responders, those all our firefighters out in California and Oregon, right? They're dealing with COVID all the time. The longer that stuff goes, the stronger chance that those systems get stressed. We're moving to fall and winter. We're stuck inside again. Numbers are going to go up. Be careful of that normalcy bias. You know, just because you have a full freezer right now with great steak in there and you got fresh produce right now, doesn't mean that you'll have access to all that later necessarily, right? Be careful again of that sort of that bias of thinking this is what's going on, because a lot of people think this is what a disaster is, right? Yeah, I'm in the disaster watching Netflix and eating popcorn. This is the way it goes down. Well, that's done us a disservice. Because the thing I worry about right now that you're rocking your pandemic, right? Now you've got it all figured out. What would be really inconvenient? Losing all your electricities. There goes your schooling from home. There goes Netflix and chill. The Zoom conference calls you might be glad to get rid of. But here's the deal. If you rely on public utilities, you're vulnerable, right? Those are things we got to look at. And the biggest one of those is indeed electricity. Whether you lose electricity from a storm, wildfire, rolling blackouts, a terrorist attack, some digital snafu, everything goes away. Your lights, your heat, refrigeration, communications, ability to do banking transactions. That's a big deal. So that's what I worry about. Which brings me around to like talking to people about this stuff. Strength in a like-minded team, fool. That's what you really need. So you want to gather some people around you who are thinking about this stuff. So that means having a talk. And that could be having a talk with the people you live with, or the people who maybe aren't your family but don't live nearby. So it may be your aged mom and dad in Indiana who don't ever want to talk about this stuff. Because here's the deal. People get squirrely when you try to bring up the talk. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear the idea that you could be hurt or they could be hurt. So you'll find a lot of resistance if you haven't already. My suggestion is to couch it in terms of love and caring. Hey, Mom, indulge me. Help me by taking away some of my worry about you guys. You're doing me a favor by allowing me to plan for all of us. Try to avoid the sort of lecture or haranguing, or getting into a power struggle with your parents or maybe your siblings, if that sounds at all familiar. So you get the buy-in. Okay, fine. Find crazy emergency person. Talk about this stuff. Okay, well then strike, right? So here's 3 things to be discussed. 1, figure that communications are going to be down. There's going to be issues in the immediate area. So appoint a single person to make roll call. Even better if that person is outside of the common geographical area. Everybody can text into that person, and then they say, okay, so-and-so is missing, or so-and-so needs some emergency supplies. But what you want to avoid is everybody like trying to call each other, messing up all the communication lines all at the same time. Not helpful. Agree on some basic levels of equipment and food. Hey, there's Uncle Barry, the eccentric Uncle Barry who lives in Wyoming, and he's never had a Gmail account, and he doesn't like to talk on the phone anyway, but we know that Uncle Barry has 2 months of food. If we can't get in contact with him when something goes down, we don't have to worry. And the next one is, listen, we have been sheltering in place. We understand it. But when do you leave and when do you evacuate? You guys need to talk about some of that stuff, which leads me to the next step, which is out of that, make some solid plans. We don't want this to be like one of those work conference calls where everybody talks for 2 hours and then they say, okay, let's get back and talk about it for another 2 hours and nothing gets done. Nobody wants that, right? So make some concrete plans out of it. You don't want to be calling your partner or your teenage kids when, again, the smoke is billowing out of the ground because the aliens have attacked. You need everybody to leap into action because that plan is so deeply embedded. So comms are down. So you don't need to be talking to people during the emergency. So figure out who will go and pick up the kids from school. That's an important one. If there's pets that are someplace as well. Those kids, even elementary school kids, they should know your address. They should know at least 1 cell phone number, if not 2 or 3. Quiz them on it, drill them on it. Think about transportation. If you are in LA and you get home on the 405 and the 405 is destroyed because of an earthquake, how are you gonna get home? Think about routes, about how do you reach places if cars don't work. Also, what happens if one of you are traveling? I'm often abroad. If something happens back here at home and I can't get in contact, I want to know where my 8-year-old is right then, right? I want to know that he's either at my home location or our evacuation location. Should I stay or should I go? Evacuating or sheltered place? Look, Home may not be perfect, but it is where you got your stuff. It's also probably where the circle of people are around you. We are often much less at risk at home than we are on the road. That being said, somebody tells you evacuate, somebody in authority, there are fires on the way, get your ass out. Listen to those evacuation orders, okay? And go ahead and turn things in your favor. For instance, when you park your car in the garage, maybe turn it facing out. Leave the garage door up in case you lose electricity. Go ahead and put the stuff in the trunk that you know you're going to need now. I'm always amazed to read these, we saw the flames and we decided, should we throw some clothes or food in the trunk? Get ahead of it. Come on, you know things are burning. Do it beforehand. And do that. Practice that evacuation. If gophers are smart enough to do it, we should too. As I mentioned, if I'd gone up to the roof in our New York City apartment and found out there was a fire escape on the back, my story would have been a lot less compelling, but a lot better for all of us. So you're leaving, got to get out. Where are you going to go? A, B, C locations. The first is your hyper local location, probably again for a house or apartment fire. Everyone may leave from a different exit, so you need a place maybe a block away, 7-Eleven, the schoolyard, close enough where everybody can get together quickly and you can account for anybody that's missing. Location B, regional. It's something not in your hood, probably something outside of your neighborhood, but maybe someplace you can reach by foot. If you can't all get home, that's where you guys would all meet. In our case, we had friends in the Upper West Side. We went to their house after the fire and we stunk up the whole place with our really smelly, smoky clothes, but we knew that's where we would go. Lastly is C location, which is outside of that general region. 100 miles away is maybe a good rule of thumb. You live on the coast, hurricanes coming in, inland. COVID has complicated things because maybe you would have stayed with, elderly relatives or folks. Maybe you can't now, so get ahead of it. Listen, New Zealand really does sound nice, but you got to have a pilot and a Gulfstream on call. So if you can do that, cool. Bring us to number 4, which is gear. Wonderful, wonderful gear. So check out these people. Check out all their gear. You know what? Don't be like these people. All the gear in the world is not that helpful, again, if you don't know how to use it. And, a few pieces that you do know how to use trumps it every time. You saw the slide before, I'm bringing it back. Practicality is your friend. If it all seems too daunting, you won't get it done. You just won't do it. Everybody always asks me about go bags. I guess go bags are like the sexy part of emergency planning. They are important, but I do not think they are the most elemental piece of your emergency plan. They're just one part of it, right? That being said, yes, absolutely, have a go bag at home. Have one for each of your family members. We have one for our 8-year-old kid. Have some stuff at work. Definitely have some stuff in your car. But you don't have to get complicated. Start small and then build up. Cash, ATMs, your credit card, they're not going to work a lot of times. A med kit, super important. Changes of clothes, socks, dude, socks. Have you ever been super wet and miserable for days on end? Socks may be the best thing to just make your mood better. Which brings us to sheltering at home. I'm assuming you're rocking it. We're all old hands at it right now, correct? One thing we don't tend to think of, however, water. We are so conditioned to, you turn the tap and water comes streaming out magically. What happens when it doesn't? Here in the US especially, it seems like a crazy idea to so many of us. But a place like New York City, there's no water, things go badly quickly. So a couple things, water storage solutions and water filtration solutions. On the left here is a thing called water bricks. Each holds 3.3 gallons. You can stack them up in a closet. You can slide them under your bed. I've got 10 of them in our New York City apartment that live underneath my queen size bed. That's a good 33 gallons that will start me out in an emergency situation. Got my room, got a garage, nice 55-gallon drum. Be careful if you do have a garage, don't put that drum on naked concrete. The chemicals can leach up into the plastic and the water, something to be aware of. And then filtration systems. Teach a man to fish, right? Well, in this case, you basically make clean water of wherever you might fish, except for the ocean. But These are camp style filters. That's a life straw, which I tend to like. I have them whenever I travel. I have them in my go bags. I have them in all our houses. Listen, be able to make clean water is magic. It's a super important thing. And hey, food. Like again, right now I got steaks in the freezer. I got fresh berries. If that goes away, I may need to go back to that peanut butter that you see there. Dried beans are great. Listen, just having a big old bucket of oatmeal. You know, by the end of the month, I promise that you'd be really sick of it, but you would be fed and regular. To that regularity. You ever go to the bathroom in the middle of the night with no lights? Sucks, right? So get ahead of your lighting and your electricity. We could talk generators, and generators definitely have their place, but you do run out of fuel. And I don't know how many people I've talked to that find they don't work half the time. So I've become pretty bullish on solar, on these lithium-ion battery packs. There's one here from Goal Zero. I own one that I just got, which will power a refrigerator, full-size refrigerator for 25 hours. If you daisy chain it to other batteries, you can basically use it as a generator. You don't have to worry about noise or pollution, and you can also charge it back up with solar, right? On the right is a solar lantern. Again, that is from a company called Empowered, which does a Lucy light. It's genius. The $20, you put them outside, get a charge, bring them into the bathroom at night, and your problems are solved. So, coming full circle. All right, cool. We're getting prepared. We're mentally into it. Now we're going to get some cool gear. Now what, right? I've just given you a ton of information. So what should I do today? I'll tell you what you shouldn't do. Don't put it off. All right, listen, just step to it. Get on it. Look to that horizon. Talk about the threats. What is most likely to mess you up, mess your family up at home, right? Then have that dreaded talk with your mom or your mate or your kid and talk about how to get ahead of some of this stuff. And again, don't be like that terrible conference call. Make some concrete plans out of it right then and then start instituting them. Lastly, get on REI or Amazon or go to your local store and get some of the stuff you've been wanting anyway. Listen, it can feel like walking over a cliff. It can get complicated. If you've got questions, I'm more than happy to speak to you, reach out. Cool. Here's something worth sort of wrapping it up with, and that is mental preparedness isn't about letting fear take over. It's easy to get obsessed about this and freak out and stay up at night and think, how can you plan for everything? You can't. You can't control everything. But getting prepared is an act of reaching out and taking control. Once you've done that, it'll actually make you feel calmer, less stressed about it. Sarah Connors always said there's a storm coming. Listen, let's make the best of those storms that we possibly can. And sometimes a storm can even be kind of beautiful. Anyway, much appreciated, guys. Thanks for listening.
Jason, thanks very, very much. That was really informative. One of the things that we said we were going to do was put up a poll, and I think we had a little bit of an issue with that. So I'm going to relaunch. I'm going to continue to put the poll up. If everybody can see that poll and if they wanted to vote on it, go ahead. While you and I talk, Jason, we're also getting some questions. I do have a couple of questions I'm going to ask you, and then folks are more than welcome to jump in on the Q&A on the right-hand side. There's two little bubbles that says Q&A. Feel free to ask Jason a question or two, and we'll try to get to them if we can. I got one for you right now, Jason. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit New York City, hit the New York City metro area, and it hit it hard. What lessons do you think that inhabitants of New York City learned from that storm?
It's interesting, right? We're slow learners. I think human beings are all slow learners, right? That normalcy bias kicks in. So Hurricane Irene was 2011. Sandy was 2012, man. And it just wreaked havoc up and down the eastern seaboard, right? We got nailed. In my case, in 2011, it was definitely pushed me to figure it out. That was one of the reasons I created Preparation Concierge, because I was like, in the city, if we lose electricity for weeks, a month, what do you possibly do? Some people never seem to get ahead of it, right? They just didn't care. Next year came Sandy. Guess what? It happened again. These people seem so surprised. Our first 2012, we had our kid, and we were out here in the Poconos during the time. We got our stuff together, and turns out, we had running water. We didn't have electricity in our New York City apartment. We didn't have electricity out here. but I had a fireplace. I had wood. We could cook out here. We could do what we needed. I wish more people would get ahead of it, learn those lessons. Like, we all have things to worry about, right? But look at California. I think California, unfortunately for Californians, they are getting ahead of it now because it's so constant, right? There's no end to it, that they do realize that stuff's not going away, right? Californians, they're dealing with so many calamities at one time that I think they believe. And sometimes when it doesn't hit you or impact somebody you know, we tend to say, that sucks for them, you know?
Yeah, and New York is not immune. I mean, you've lived through a few disasters there, some man-made, unfortunately, and a lot of lessons to learn.
Yeah, 2002 blackouts, the terrorist attacks, the hurricanes, you know, again, you always know something's going to hit you. I don't care where you live, who you are, it's going to happen to you somewhere along the way, right? So again, now's the time to get ahead of it, because we'd like to think it's not, it will.
Couple questions rolling in here. Let's take one. Your experience in the fire in New York City, has that caused you to rethink where you live now?
No, because it hasn't made me rethink where I live now, but it certainly makes me more aware when I'm in a new building, or, you know, in our current building, I know how to get out. I'm much more aware of getting out. It's an old building like the old one, the other previous one was. But even in a hotel, you know those funny little things on your hotel room door that you absolutely ignore? I do take a look at them now. Like, you know, what are my egress points? How am I going to get out of this hotel? Because it's difficult, right? But the fire is something most likely to happen to you more than aliens hitting you, for sure. So.
Another question was, how much do you think a good survival bag or go bag should cost? Like, we put the whole thing together, what are we talking about for a budget there?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Like, the cool thing is, again, I'm a gear guy, love gear. So I have my bags I go hiking with, right? The nice thing, if you are an outdoors person or you're a traveler and you have gear you use camping, that's the great stuff. That's the same stuff, right? So I have, you know, my bags that I take out on the trail for 3 or 4 nights overnight. That's my go bag. Normally, if I'm taking it hiking, I take out some of that stuff and replace it with what I'm going to go hiking with. But, you know, it needs to be comfortable. It needs to be durable. I would say your bag is important. So, you know, go to that REI. Look at a bag that you would go spend 20 miles hiking in, and that should be one of your parameters.
We got one from Facebook. Real quick, placing 2x4s under a huge water jug in the garage. Safe? Good idea? Yes or no?
Yeah, just make it stable. Actually, you know, even just, you know, I've got plywood. Mine sits on plywood. It's no big deal, right? So the other thing you need to be aware is you need to put some, in that water, there's some the droplets you need to put in, which helps that water stay without stuff growing into it, and you need to replace it every once in a while. As a matter of fact, I got my 55-gallon right up here. It's tomorrow on my list is pour that water out, bleach it all out, make sure there's nothing growing in there, and refill it. Same in New York City. Something to think about. That water won't be tasty forever.
How heavy is your own? This is a question from a viewer, but how heavy is your own go bag?
So I compartmentalize my go bag. I've got one for my wife, I've got one for my kid, and one for me. There are certain things I can take out and put in depending on the situation and also the season, right? I can put a full tent in there. The tent sits in there if I want it. If I'm taking my car and I don't need it, then I don't necessarily need that tent. If I am, you know, depending on the weather, the season. But listen, you know, again, take it out. Take your bag out and go hike with it. Go put in 10 miles. See how it feels. Same as I would say, you know, if you're planning on a big hiking excursion, a big camping excursion, test that gear. I can't tell you the exact weight of mine, but I'll tell you it's the same one I would take over, you know, 3 days up and down hills. And same for my kid. You know, he does overnights. He does a great job, but there's a level when he's no longer happy. So that idea of having some pieces in your bag that could come in or come out for luxury.
We've got a couple of questions that are sort of related and talking about what goes in your bag. The first question is, would you include encountering a mass casualty event to be a disaster? And then sort of in what bleed kit supplies would you keep? And then sort of twinning on that, or what are med kit essentials? So I guess maybe talk a little bit about bleed kits and med kit essentials, if you would.
So there's a company, which is a lot of people use, Adventure Med Kits, right? And they come in, you know, you buy them, they're $20 to $100 depending. And I've got a couple here. I actually traveled with a little one in Bhutan last year. I got stung by a wasp, a massive wasp. Wasn't a big deal, but then I ended up sort of like blowing up and you know, pulled out that and I used it, right? What I've discovered is that those kits have some great things, but there's other things they don't have. Like sometimes these adventure medical kits don't have enough like Neosporin. Like Neosporin is something I'm gonna use, right? I look at some of those other things. There's a scalpel in there. I don't know how to use it. Like I have my knife. I don't know what I would use that scalpel for. I'm not equipped to use that scalpel, but I make it a point to open up those bags and actually look to see what's in there. They're pretty smartly put out, but I'm not equipped to deal with a mass casualty event, right? But I do. There's these blood trauma clot kits that are really great. That if somebody is bleeding badly, you can put this clot kit on them, and it will actually help clot a wound. Dude, that's a great piece. That's a great piece of something to have in there that I think is worth adding because, again, most situations, if it's serious enough, you're hoping just to put it off until somebody else more qualified gets there. Otherwise, you're dealing with, you know, moleskins should be in your bag. You know, if you're hiking out of town, you know, you think about your foot care is a big one.
Couple more coming in. Fire extinguisher around the property. Good. How many should you have?
Hell yeah. We have, again, a little worried about fire. You know, once burned, twice, whatever that saying is. But yeah, I've got, I think in this Poconos house, I think we've got about 8 of them. I've got them in the garage. I've got them certainly by the fireplace, in each of the guest rooms, that kind of stuff. There's a company I've come on to that's called Element, and they sell these tiny little ones that you strike, and they're of course one use, but they are about this big and they are incredibly transportable. Great little thing to have something in your car. You know, you don't want to lug around a big old fire extinguisher. Worth noting, by the way, if you ever use a fire extinguisher, they don't last long. They're and so if you're expecting to put out a big fire on those, it doesn't work that way. So they are only good for a small fire. They go away very quickly.
I want to talk about a pucker factor. Try using a fire extinguisher on a boat when that's your only option, and it better.
Lots of water around.
Real quick, there's a couple questions that are coming in. I think they're interesting that sort of, I wouldn't say encroach, but sort of go toward what some of our guest speakers coming up later in October are going to talk about. Here's a good one, and it's right up your alley. Then we're going to go to the poll results. Then this will be the last question for now. And we'll go to the poll results, but here's one right up your alley. If you could have one survival vehicle, Jason, one survival, would it be a Bronco, a Defender, a Jeep, or a Porsche Cayenne, or something else?
All right, yes, I do write about cars. So, man, there's so many cars I just want. I will say I just spent a week with a Jeep, you know, and there's one of the great things about Jeeps as a vehicle that you can, in the United States, is that there are a lot of parts around. You can interchange those parts, and it makes a pretty good one. There's not a lot of storage room in them, but yeah, I would probably go with the Jeep as being a pretty darn good vehicle, but I want a Defender worse.
All right, I've been told one last question, then we'll go to the poll. And then Gordon Jensen asked if it's okay to list some of the items that we talked about. Jonathan's going to wrap up things and tell you where all this stuff's going to live in perpetuity on the web, so you can check out what you did tonight. So last question. Do you think that your prep kit should be set up for your environment, that is urban versus rural? How do you do that, and how do you make the changes there?
Yeah, the essential stuff is the same. Again, your med kit, right? You want a knife. You want, but now if in the city, you want to figure out a way to get out of the city, right? Because otherwise you're pretty much talking about sheltering at home, or I guess you could end up in like a city type shelter, right? So, but in the city, you're not going to need to carry something like an axe, right? Unless, you know, if you figure out those egress points, how are you going to get out? A lot of city dwellers don't have a car, right? So it becomes really an issue of, in a place like New York City, it's an island. How do you get over the bridge? Start thinking about that stuff, that maps. Dude, you're evacuating. One of the most important things is, you know, don't worry about whether it's an axe or something else silly. It's go ahead, figure out your 5 different ways, you know, which bridges you're going to get over, and how to get out of that city. That is more important than any single tool that you could do. Okay, a paper map.
I don't know if you can see the poll results, Jason, but we'll just go over them briefly before we do
okay,
it.
cool.
So water purification, you know, 43% of our respondents, and I think
Totally
that's right.
agree.
And considering that we're a knife company and we put this webinar on, I don't think it's a surprise that 23% of folks said knife or multi-tool was second. But
Tools make tools, you know, can't beat that.
and you know, I did, having worked in the past with a sock company, really good socks can make the difference. I mean, honestly, between life or death, if you've got to put a lot of miles on.
Do socks make you happy? Charging devices is one of those things that I don't think we would have seen there a few years ago, but it's become pretty darn important, right? And again, because sometimes our alerts now are coming over our cell phone. But again, remember, your comms are likely to go down in so many emergencies that people are overly reliant on their cells. It's a big issue. But nonetheless, man, having a charging device can be a really nice thing to have. So I'm glad. It's interesting to notice compass is 0%.
Yeah. I mean, do we need it anymore? I guess if your phone goes down, you're going to need a compass. And I still think you should be able to read a compass, right?
Hey, again, it goes to that maps. You know, we're overly reliant on our GPSs. And again, guess what? When stuff happens and your GPS doesn't work and you can't drive home normally, then you're kind of screwed.
Try the share results right here. Let's see if that works. I guess everybody can now see the poll results that I was looking at. So there they are. And I'm also going to turn it back over to Jonathan from SOG and sort of wrap up the night. Jason, I can't thank you enough. It was great. I learned a lot, and I look forward to more of these presentations coming up here in the future.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. I hope you guys had a good time. Enjoy a beer or a cocktail now. I know I will.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Jason and Matt. I hope everyone else enjoyed that and found it to be quite useful. Thank you for actually attending, and really good question and answer session right there. So we recorded all this and we'll post a recording. I've already placed it in the, a link in the chat. We'll post it in about the next week, but we'll have the video. We'll also have a summary of the presentation. So it can be your checklist, and hopefully if you found it useful, please share it with those that you think are going to benefit of it. As mentioned earlier, we have 2 more webinars coming up. So on the 8th of October, we're going to have Emily Valentine on embracing situational awareness. She's a personal safety and style coach and founder of Style Me Tactical. We're looking forward to that one, as we are also looking forward to Sarah Carlson's presentation on preparing and defining your EDC essentials. So there's some questions about should you mix and match your gear for different environments. So Sarah will touch on that, and that'll be on the 22nd of October. So registration for those is in the chat as well. You can also find it on the blog post on our website. But for now, that's all we've got. So I just want to say thank you and good night.